Hey, everybody. Welcome to another Rackspace Office Hours Hangout. My name is Alan Bush, and we're broadcasting live from the castle. It's the San Antonio headquarters of Rackspace. I'm joined, as usual, by Drew Cox. How you doing today, Drew?
I'm here. I'm trying to stay a little bit warmer than typical. We've got the air conditioning running and it's finally cool outside.
That's good. That's good. I'm glad you're dressed for the weather today. Also dressed for the weather from the far north regions of Austin. We have John Moore joining us today. Hey, John, how you doing?
Doing pretty good. How you doing?
Oh, not too shabby, not too shabby. So, John, you've been a racker for a little while, and you've kind of moved on to work with the Object Rocket team. Can you tell us a little bit about your how long you've been a racker and kind of what you're doing now with Object Rocket?
Yeah, I think I've been a racker for coming up on 3 years now. I think it'll be 3 years in February. Started off in managed cloud and then moved over here to Object Rocket to play with data. Started off as a CDE, customer data engineer, basically frontline support, handling you name it. This comes to data, so I handle things like tickets coming in, problems with drivers, doing updates on Mongo, stuff like that, and then helping data transformations, helping customers do different things with data. Now I've moved on to more of a DevOps role, so I'm a systems engineer, and now I'm playing with like kind of the larger picture, large-scale testing with Mongo, especially with some of the new versions that are coming out. There are some pretty big changes in the Mongo community. I also do things with Elasticsearch and Redis as well. Object Rocket has a lot of different products that we play with. We play with MySQL, Hadoop, Cassandra, Redis, Mongo, and Elasticsearch. So a lot of different things we can play about.
Yeah, absolutely. I know Drew and I worked with you quite a little bit when you, like you mentioned, you started off on the managed cloud side, and was a
Yep.
big fan of your work then. And good to see that you're helping our customers still over on the Object Rocket side. So thanks again for that. Great. So hey, today we wanted to invite you on to talk a little bit about data, right? So we've been talking about big data for the last couple of weeks, and that's like you just mentioned, that's what you're doing. So let's talk about it in the context of it's the end of the year. People are looking to see what they can do starting next year. They might be making plans for the rest of this year and then the start of next year. So let's talk about some of those things they can do to kind of change the way that they look at data. So when we were chatting before the show, you kind of mentioned one thing that you called spring cleaning. Can you talk about that just a little bit to kind of kick us off?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the holiday season is a really big time where you kind of ramp up, you get caught up in how your application works now, the type of workload that you currently see throughout the year, and then you try to scale, right? Get to that point where you can handle that 10x traffic spike, because you never know if it's going to come, but you better be ready when it does. So during that time, you really don't have the luxury of sitting there and like doing a deep dive on your data. Are you storing things in a particular way that's the most efficient, so that you can do, if you can do things better next year? I think when it comes to spring cleaning, we oftentimes throw out things we don't need, or at least reevaluate what we have around the house. And I think the same goes for your data that you keep inside of whatever data store you're playing with. For Mongo, for example, look at the data types that you store inside of particular values. One example I can give recently is had a customer who was using status fields for a type of messaging queue. And their status fields were strings, very large strings. They would be like the words processing, completed, failed, in progress, things like that. That's a lot of data when you just come down to the bytes of it, right? And so one of the things you can do is, if you think about your application over time, those state fields could easily be represented as an integer. And integers stored both on disk and in RAM are much smaller. And so those tiny little changes can really make a big difference long term and while you scale. But it's certainly not something you want to do during the holiday season. So that's one example. Another example is you might not need the data that you calculated or captured over the holiday season for the entire year. Maybe it's time to take a look at your data retention policy. Do you need to store all 30, 40 gigs of data that you have, terabytes of data in some cases. Is there a way to cold storage it or put it off into another data store? Maybe something that's a little slower to access, not as heavily hit, but something that you can access when needed and do analytics on, but certainly not throw away the data. These are the type of things that I like to have conversations with customers about. So,
I think both of those things play to the general approach of efficiency. I think that anytime you're thinking about efficiency, there needs to be some ebb and flow there, and you mentioned this really clearly. It's represented in this window of time that we're in for the next probably month, is the tail end of a high spike where efficiency is not that important. It's effectiveness. You just have to get your business has to stay stable. You have to keep the site up, the app up, the solution in place, healthy and performant, and that is a higher priority. Now, once you're not monetizing that at the same pace that you expect to during the high traffic season, then you need to shift gears and that ebb and flow back and forth between higher priority on performance and stability versus efficiency and scale. That's a pretty big conversation. It's a consistent conversation. Where are you on that continuum? And as we're watching that pendulum either start swinging already or will soon be swinging back towards the efficiency side of things, you make some really solid points. Last week, we talked about all of the data that people are capturing and identifying new places to capture more data. And I think it's only appropriate that the spring cleaning conversation play the other side of that, because it's always going to be somewhere between those two extremes of, capture every last bit of data and see what you can do with it, and run as lean as possible and see how you can really get the most out of the resources and the most out of the budget that you find in the situation. And I really like the recommendation of tightening the way you're keeping all of that data. Yeah, you can capture it all, but if you replace failure with a integer, you've just cleaned up. You're still capturing the same data. You've just replaced something that's bulky with something that's smooth. And so you're streamlining that approach where you're able to take the advice that we gave last week of capture it all so you can get value out of it down the road, and don't be wasteful. Be smart about the way you're capturing it all. So I really like the decisiveness with which you're able to say, yes, it's important, but think through how you're doing it, because just doing it, you can go work out all the time, but if you don't have a plan and a regimen and a goal, you're just getting sore consistently instead of achieving something specific. And so I really like that nugget. I think that's a really useful tool for a lot of people.
Yeah, it's a fun conversation for sure. I just wanted to add to it that it's scary. I know it's scary to say all the data or the way that you've been doing your business for a really long time, it's time to change. So if you don't question something, you'll never know if you can do it better. That's the one thing I like to say to customers when we have these conversations. So.
And to kind of polish that up a little bit further, you and the Object Rocket team are seeing a lot of customers doing a lot of different things. And so while it is scary for someone in isolation or in a vacuum to endeavor this next big iteration, this next big step, when you partner with a team that's done a variety of things a variety of ways, then you get that expertise, you get that experience. I have a couple of items on the Cox family menu that I cook pretty consistently, and I don't have to look at the recipe anymore. Like it's just knowledge I have. But if I'm going and trying a new recipe, you're going to bet that I'm going to have that recipe right in front of me, and I might call my mom and be like, hey, that one thing you used to always make? I'm looking at the recipe, and I'm curious about this. Can you give me some more direction? And there's going to be a lot more reliance on everyone else's expertise. So with a partner like Rackspace, and specifically in this conversation, with a partner like Object Rocket, you've got people who have cooked the same thing over and over and over again, and they know what happens if if maybe one of the ingredients has to shift a little bit, and they know what happens when they're cooking it with this other side that has this other specific amount of time and has to cook at a different temperature, and so the potholes that are in an everyday type of an issue, every day for a data-focused company, can be identified very quickly and easily. Whereas if approaching your data this new way is your first time, it's really nice to have that partner alongside that has that experience and can say, no, you're going the right way. I do want to point out that there's a slightly better way to do it. There's this tool that can make chopping those onions easier or whatever. There's this approach that can make this part better, but you're doing right. You've got the encouragement and the comfort of that expertise coming alongside. So it doesn't have to be as scary as it would be if it was just, we're hoping this is going to work, we're going to gamble. You don't have to.
Mm-hmm.
That's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, that's a great point.
So you mentioned a long string of various tools that Object Rocket supports and works with.
Mm-hmm.
Redis being, a super ephemeral in-memory caching, or it's really used for a lot of different things, but kind of a very specific tool that's very different than talking about Cassandra or SQL or some of these other other components. So a lot of what we hear customers say is, not only am I trying to do more with the data I have a whole new project, a whole new direction that I want to go. How do you talk through those sorts of things when someone's shifting a technology, not just maybe the way they're using the same technology, but in going from a SQL structure to a NoSQL structure, or when going from one sort of maybe Memcache to Redis, or using a different technology to achieve a similar thing? How do you talk through that type of transformation?
That's a really good question. It's one of the things that I love to talk about the most. I'm a big fan of taking a technology and doing what's best in that technology. Something I tell customers all the time is, just because a technology can do something doesn't mean you should. Redis, for example, right? Like you said, it's ephemeral, or at least it should be. It has a persistence layer. It has a great replication model. The newer versions of Redis support clustering, different ways of scaling. Beyond that, there's things you can do both at the application layer, and there's things that you can do at a third-party layer. Things like Twim proxy, which allow you to shard your data, so to speak, split it up amongst clusters yourself. Or you can implement that at the application side. The cool thing about this is just don't get locked into like a blog post you saw out there where there was a niche use case and somebody did something crazy. Think about it. Maybe a component of the application should go in Redis. Make it ephemeral. Don't make it your primary data store. Don't keep that data in Redis and think Redis is always going to be there. Look at different ways to leverage different technologies and kind of layer them to solve different problems. Different technologies have different pitfalls. They have different scaling problems when it comes to getting to, say, the holiday season, for example. If you add the complexity of all these things together, they're really not that bad, as opposed to picking one technology and trying to make it fit all of your needs. So I definitely would like to go the approach of layering technologies, and that discussion is really fun, because when I have those conversations with customers, I like to talk about them, their business, their idea, what are the 5 things they do now, what are the 5 things they want to do. Take those, throw that all out on the table, and choose the different technologies that cover 1 to n number of those things, and see how many technologies we're talking about at the end of the day. So it comes down to getting kind of intimate with a customer and their application and their use case, and that's something that we do all the time. We don't just, we don't believe in canned cookie cutter responses. Every single customer's environment is special. There's something that they're doing that's unique to them, and we can all learn and make that, that transition to something new. We can make it awesome and efficient. It doesn't have to be scary like we were talking about before. So,
Yeah,
I think that conversation is really, really important to come to with priorities already in place. Priorities can be kind of pulled out of that conversation, but if you have been able to sit down and look at the business, what's the top priority for the coming year, what's our top set of goals, what's the most near-term need that we have, identifying maybe the biggest fire that needs to be put out. It's going to depend, again, on your business. How stable is it? How much triage work do you have to do versus how much sculpting and fine-tuning work? Where are you on that spectrum? But if you don't come to that conversation, the clear idea of where the priorities are, that conversation is only going to be able to go so far. And so it's incumbent on customers and on businesses to know what's the most important thing. Like someone who's just using a very simple approach to get started with a POC, once they've proven that concept is of value, what's the next step? Because a POC, I think simple can be the best approach because it's time to market, it's all these other things. But if you launch with your POC and then that ends up being your legacy long-term solution, you're leaving a lot of things on the table. And so as you shift from phase to phase, your priorities are going to kind of shift around a little bit. Your business is going to have new needs, new requirements, some growth, performance, whatever. But we can have those conversations and pull pieces out. Those conversations can go a lot further if you know more specifically what's the big need. Is it a new thing? Is it solving the problem? Is it stopping the bleeding? Is it so on and so forth? Alan, I totally cut you off, so I'm going to let you go from there.
Oh, I was just completely agreeing with everything that John had said there. I mean, I think those are great conversations to happen, and I mean, I think that's where we can really reiterate that that's one of the benefits of Object Rocket and working with a managed provider like Rackspace, where we're not just providing the raw infrastructure, but we're also providing the expertise to go along with it. And there are some people that provide expertise, and that expertise is the same for everybody. And there are other providers that listen and understand what each individual customer's needs are. And so this is it's a really strong message, and I hope that a lot of people hear that, because it's absolutely vital that we listen to what our customers are saying and try to find out which technologies, plural, oftentimes to use, and not just using the new hotness just because it's the new hotness, but trying to find the right mix of technologies to solve the individual problems that our customers have. So, John, thank you and everybody else on that Object Rocket team for doing that day in and day out for our customers.
Absolutely.
I think that's been an MO of Rackspace's solution tailoring. When you come to a problem, there's not usually just one solution, but when you present a series of solutions, you could go one of these ways. Usually, if you go with just one, you have pros and cons, and you can go with just the other, there's pros and cons. But when you learn to blend those two things, you're able to kind of cover up some of the deficiencies of one option with some of the strengths of the other. And so that leads kind of to my next question, which is, when looking at the next piece of something to pivot, are there some really easy wins that you could say, this is a pain point that I've had with my legacy system? Let's start with SQL, and then we'll kind of move to the newer technologies. But here's a pain that I've had with SQL. What's one small step I can take to integrate a new technology, solve a specific pain point that I've had, and gain that benefit of learning that new technology without making a full bore pivot or trying to pull a bunch of levers at once? Because you're really, in testing and in growing, when you change a variable at a time, you're going to be able to have a much clearer picture of what real impact that change had, instead of change all the things, fix all the problems. If you do them all in parallel, your results are going to be the sum total of all of those changes, and finding out which one was maybe the most effective or the most problematic becomes an absolute mess. So when making a change at a time and iterating on that, are there specific kind of no-brainer, let's start with X, and then depending on how interested in that topic you are, we could probably go for the rest of the hour in it alone. But I'll let you start with integrating a new technology on top of a SQL technology that might have specific roadblock.
I think you hit the nail on the head there with be specific. Find that pain point. Because now we're talking about a design pattern. Like, I was a dev for a long time, so it comes down to computer science, right? These problems are not that difficult to solve, especially if you can break them down to their base components. And the base components will align themselves with a natural way of doing something. You know, there's best practices out there for handling different types of scaling, different types of data. So really, it does depend on that problem. You mentioned SQL, and it's like, say, something that you're doing in SQL, what can you do differently? When it comes to playing with stuff in SQL, the language itself kind of dictates what you have to work with, right? One of the things I hated most as being a developer and playing with SQL was the fact that it told me how I had to write my code. I had to think about my things ahead of time, right? Which, let's be honest, it's not always a luxury that we have. Sometimes we have to hack on the fly. Sometimes we have to get things out there, which isn't a bad thing. But like you said, scientific method, don't hack the world. Hack the tiny thing you're playing with.
Please.
Yes. When it comes to that, like, I would look at the pain point that they have. I would look at SQL, and I would say, I'm really dictated in what I can do. Moving to NoSQL is not that different from playing with a SQL database. The one thing I can't stress more enough is more usage of a schema. Just because it doesn't need a schema doesn't mean you shouldn't have one, right? Don't throw any data that you want into your database. Think about it beforehand, especially, like I said, strings, change them to ints if it's a state thing. When you're making your field names, don't make them 20 characters in length. Verbosity is fantastic in logging, not when you're storing data. So make it small, make it simple changes. But yeah, I guess when I think about this, I really need a problem to solve. I would need somebody to come to me and say, I've got this problem, here's a pain point. And then I can probably talk through the design pattern and get us down the road a little bit farther. So that's a tough one for me to answer without a specific problem, I have to say.
Well, I know that we have a lot of customers who may have built something with a NoSQL backend from the beginning, and then realized, you know, authentication really makes a ton of sense to just have a SQL solution. It's just, you know, a bunch of pairs of credentials. So I'm not going to clutter up a NoSQL solution with something that really SQL's made to do very well and has been doing for forever. And so I've seen that kind of back step of, you know, we're just going to launch with all the new technologies, and oh, well, there's a real reason that this more established technology is there, and there's some things it does really well, so we're going to back into a solution like that. And so not having a specific solution, that's kind of where my brain was moving, is there are certainly specific strengths of each of the tools that we've talked about. Things that, while you can do it with many of the others, what it's built to do well and what trade-offs you have in selecting that. And there's certain pairings, I guess, that make a lot of sense. And so maybe that's a way to shift the conversation. What sorts of pairings do you see work really well so that you have some of these best of both worlds covering for each other's faults types of solutions? So not really giving you much more direction than that. Where can you see really nice confluences of strengths and weaknesses?
So that actually brings something to mind. One of the things I see done a lot with Mongo, for example, is queuing. using Mongo as a queue. It's fantastic. It can store this JSON object. You can do a lot of different things. You can play with states, kind of keep like a state model going. From a technology perspective, from a usage standpoint, it's fantastic. Let's talk about ops. Me on the ops side, when I see somebody using a queue, the first thing I think of is fragmentation. Older versions of Mongo, specifically 3.0 mmap and below, they have a fragmentation problem. So when you delete data, or when you change keys and they have to move physically within files, you leave behind these gaps. Now, it should go into a free space kind of buffer that when a new data comes in, if it can fit there, it'll use it. If it can't, it'll put it at the end of the file. More often than not, you will see it not choose to use data that it can fit right there. That's due to padding factors, different things like that. So you'll end up just growing over time. So what I see problems with queuing, I usually see problems with disk space. I just see unbounded disk growth, and it kind of goes crazy after a while, especially if you don't capture it early. That's when I start wondering, okay, what is your queue doing? If it's just state tracking, if it's just keeping some almost lock, if you will, around to manage what part of a process of a pipeline you're in, store that in Redis. Redis is ephemeral, but it can be persistent. So you don't have to worry about losing your place in a queue. But Redis doesn't fragment. And if it does fragment, it's very, very little. It's also extremely fast because it's all stored in RAM. So there's a use case where I would align those two different things. Going back to your authentication model, I completely agree with storing like authentication layers and kind of user like RBAC control systems inside of SQL, because those are relational models. You know, those are things that you can model inside your application, and you need things to relate to one another, and you need to be able to kind of couple different storage, different places of storing different data together to solve those problems. With that said, though, you can definitely put some of that stuff in NoSQLs, in NoSQL solutions, such as Mongo or Redis. Certainly the session handling of authentication, right? When people think Redis, they usually think sessions. You can also think about like nonce objects. You know, if you're playing with authentication, or if you've done cryptography, you know, like very ephemeral authentication sequences. Something that's used once and then it's gone. You know, kind of that token-based access. Again, something that should be aligned in NoSQL. Managing token-based access in SQL servers. I think we've all seen session states, something being stored in MySQL and having it fall over on the worst day of the year. It's not a good thing to run into, but it is a problem because you also have to think about the rapidness of that technology. SQL's great for storing that long-term data, but rapidly changing stuff, put it in something much faster. So, yeah, those are good topics. Another one I can think of is for the use case of Elasticsearch, right? When it comes to, well, one of the couplings I see a lot is like Mongo and Elasticsearch. Mongo has the aggregation framework, it has MapReduce, it has full text search, beta in 2.4, it was full released in 2.6 and above, but it has its limitations. It also has some pretty large space impact when it comes to storing it on data, or excuse me, all the data on disk. Elasticsearch is designed for that kind of stuff. It gives you a lot more scaling vectors. You can easily change your Elasticsearch cluster kind of on the fly. It's very discovery-based. When something comes up, it can naturally just join the cluster, start getting data, and it can replicate and do its thing from there. Just because Mongo can do stuff like that, do search, do text-based indexing, again, is it what it's designed to do? The guys over there at Elasticsearch, what they've done with the Lucene database behind the scenes, it's amazing. It's incredible. It's built to do what it's supposed to do. In that space, though, one of the questions I get often is, why Elasticsearch? Why not Solr? That's a great question. They both have their different things. They both have their different pros and cons. But like you mentioned before, what can you do with each of those pros and cons? Can you leverage the pros of one to cover the weaknesses of another? And then it comes down to, I think, just expertise, right? Where we come in. We're great with Elasticsearch. Have we done stuff with Solr before? Back in Managed Cloud, I used to play with a lot of Solr stuff, especially when it came to kind of going on TV, Shark Tank style stuff. Those were always fun days. Load up the docs and kind of go from there. If you don't have anybody on your team that's not familiar with one of those particular technologies, don't choose it, or at least put it low on the priority. Make its weight much lower. Go with something that somebody's used before, something that they've been around the block once or twice. They haven't just read a blog and it's the new hotness. You know what I mean?
So the thing that comes to mind in that situation is if you stay in that type of a solution, you'll never be able to adopt the next technology that maybe really does solve your key problem. So thinking through how you adopt a new technology that maybe you don't have the expertise in-house is a really important piece to your strategy in approaching your data. And I think there's a lot of times where things get adopted just because they're new and cool and not because they're specifically going to solve a problem. But if you can find a way to in testing and in like the 2.0 approach of your environment or whatever the next release is going to be, begin to bake in pieces of that new technology and find a way to put training wheels on that new solution, you're going to have a better time because it's not there's not a situation where the Shark Tank type moment of everything is built towards this. This is a huge opportunity. It's a make or break, or could put us over the hump, or whatever that home run metaphor you choose is. That's not the time to introduce a new thing you're not comfortable with. It's the time to shore up what you have to ensure that it can make it through, so that you can begin to iterate from there on the success that hopefully you're able to achieve in that moment. But when looking at it's going to be early January. Hopefully, that's the quiet time for your business, so that you can really dig into strategy and direction for 2016. Begin to bring in those new technologies in a less impactful place. So, having a conversation with someone who can speak to which technology is the right one to bring in is important. But bring it in a way that's not going to painfully impact your big moment, your big opportunity. It really needs to be thought through, just because it claims to be able to do it, and maybe it might be the absolute best answer. It doesn't mean it's time to jump on it right now, or the place to plug it in specifically.
Mm-hmm. One thing that brings to mind though. Bleeding edge. Like, let's say that you've got one of these technologies, Elasticsearch, Mongo, Redis, what have you. A week ago, they came out with a brand new version. I should use that. Maybe not, right? Give things time to bake in, too. So bringing in new technologies is great. Don't always go with the latest, greatest. Don't go with the thing at the top of the list when you go to the downloads page, Go look at stuff out there. Go look at a few versions back. Take a look at the stability versus brand new features. If you've never played with something before, maybe you want something that's going to help you when something bad happens, because maybe you didn't know how to do it right the first time. Don't shoot yourself in the foot by choosing something so brand new that nobody's around to help you. So.
Well, I'm gonna go out on a limb and imagine that. The moment something new is launched, there's a couple people in the Object Rocket office who are getting their hands dirty immediately and kicking some tires and finding some potholes. And
guilty.
That's one of those values that's hard to quantify with numbers, but it's easy to feel when working with an expert. There's always going to be some new feature that everybody's waiting. Finally, it's going to drop and everything will change. And the minute that beta is out, you see that it's possible and you want to go and get the value immediately. But the two sides of that can be a deterrent from a customer standpoint is, one, just trying to keep up with all the new things that are rumored and finally available in beta and all that stuff. Just keeping up with the feature sets is a job. I mean, that you have to keep on top of all of your RSS feeds and keep on top of all the forums, and that's work. That's time that you could be spending doing something more directly impactful to the bottom line and goals of the company. But then also the implementation of that and the practice that people whose job it is to keep up with it and to understand, when it's ready for prime time and where the new versions should be used and where older versions are maybe still more ideal. That hands-on experience and application is where having a partner whose role it is to kick those tires and get feedback and understand where the really strong parts are and where maybe the room for improvement parts of a new deployment may be, or of a new version of something may be. Those are hard to quantify in a amount of money towards the bottom line or worth the cost standpoint, but when you think about the amount of time that gets spent in just keeping up with the information and with the hands-on application, if you can repurpose that time towards something that's valuable towards the business and let someone else handle that, that can be hugely valuable. That can be a load off your mind, trying to just keep up, but also a load off your schedule. So I think that's a place that having an expert who keeps up with that can be really valuable. Rackspace has been talking about that as a value in the AWS world and in the security world, and clearly here in this conversation we're having about how you store and structure your data. Object Rocket can take that load off, and when the new cool feature comes out, we'll be the first to try it, and we'll be the first to put it through its paces, and we'll be the first to know when prime time is go time. And that can just keep you from finding yourself way off in the weeds, hacking together a thing that someone claimed that they were able to do that still doesn't really meet your needs because all the other trade-offs that you experience.
One of the things that is kind of cool about that, it's actually something my buddy Jeff is one of our lead Elasticsearch engineers. I see him online. We work nights together. He'll be up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and he'll go, "Hey, John, you got to read this." And he'll send me through these myriad of links all the way to these GitHub issues. And he's reading head plus one, like he's reading crazy branches that people have put out there in GitHub. He's reading the issues. He's reading the code. He's just crazy involved in this because he cares so much about it. I do the same thing on the Mongo side. I go crazy. The day they launched 3.2, I was out there. Even the RC, actually, I was out there, and I was playing with it, and I got it set up. And I saw all the funny stuff that they're improving on the platform, all the features they're coming out with. And I nerd out. We're nerds, let's be honest, all right? I'm sitting here, I'm watching Star Wars, getting ready for tonight and tomorrow, and I'm sitting there and I'm playing with Mongo, trying to break it. And the cool thing is to break it, I put it through the paces that I know some of our largest customers are going to put it through. And like you said, you don't have time to sit there and try to better your business and at the same time go become an expert or even just build some level of comfort in something that's so fresh and so out there. Leave it to the people who geek out about that stuff, And that's certainly something that we do here pretty heavily. Andy on the Redis side, I think he's done more things with clustering. Bill is another I don't even know what his title is anymore. I believe it was Mad Scientist of Redis at one point. He's a cool guy, and he does he does crazy things with Redis. That's something that we do here pretty heavily. We always try to keep fresh on things, and certainly tell a customer, I don't think this is ready yet. Don't go with it just because, like you said, one person was able to get something to work. It might not work for you. So.
And it's hard to justify a salary towards someone who's going to be tinkering with leading edge technologies that aren't ready for prime time. But when you can partner with a company who can justify spending time tinkering with toys that are soon going to be valuable but need to be put through their paces, then you can get the value that being able to pay somebody to do that full time for you without having someone on the payroll you're paying full-time for. You're paying a company who can stay atop that stuff and can spend the time geeking out. And I know that there are times when you shift from, I've got a platform as a service or a software as a service component that I'll switch out for owning my own, rolling my own down the road when I need all of the control. But that again talks to the product life cycle of your business. It talks to the point in time and the prioritization that you have. And there's so many values that go beyond just, I can trust them to run my Mongo, I can trust them to run my Redis, that don't really go quantified, that when you look at it from the standpoint of to operate my business with this level of expertise and precision, I would have to employ X number more people and pay them X number more overtime and all those other things. When you can come alongside a company that's doing that, achieve your goals, take advantage of those lessons learned, it's exciting. And so here we are wrapping up a year of all kinds of new features and new versions and new technologies that Rackspace is supporting, that Object Rocket is supporting, that customers are using. I'm looking forward to another year where likely we'll see very much the same thing. We'll see bunches of new technologies, people who build more focused, more purpose-built tools that get rid of some of the roadblocks that came before, and likely with trade-offs for other things. So to keep abreast of that stuff, I know Alan and I love having these kinds of shows because we get to bring on people who spend their time focusing in areas that we haven't had the time or spent the time focusing in. We get to learn from them, and that's always fun and exciting. And we'll continue to do that next year, bringing you experts on all sorts of things, the new and exciting that comes out next year. But there are pockets of this company doing that day in and day out, and that's what keeps it fun.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I mean, it's been great to hear you, John, talk about all of the different things that you individually, and then I'm really glad that you mentioned all of the other people, or a lot of the other people that you're working with at Object Rocket that are helping out our customers on a daily basis. I mean, this is just like Drew said. This has been a great educational opportunity for us. I mean, this is our 127th show, I think, and one of the things that we always try to do is bring people on that are smarter than us and passionate about what they do, and I think we hit a bullseye on that one. So, again, thanks. So I know we've got a lot of additional content about a lot of our data services and the tools that we use coming up next year, right? So Elasticsearch, more on Mongo, more on Redis, I want to say. But can you tell me a little bit about what you might be excited about in the next year? One thing that you might point our customers toward that you think they could implement starting off next year that you think would be the most beneficial to them to get started up in this next year?
So going back towards the part of the conversation we were talking about, like upgrading and fresher versions of things that you're using. Take a look at the new advancements that have come out. Don't jump right to them, but definitely put them on the roadmap. One of the things that I've actually started even before the holiday season was helping people move to newer versions of Mongo, newer versions of Redis. They do come with enhancements. They do come with new features. The key there, though, is bug fixes, right? There's probably bugs that are out there that you just want to make sure you never have to run into. So one of the conversations I like to have kind of start of the year or end of the year is let's plan to start planning on upgrading. Let's let that calendar invite for January 4th when everybody comes back to work. Let's have these conversations. So I do think it's a good idea to take a look at what you're currently doing. Take a look at the roadmap of some of the products you already have in your portfolio and look at what they've done in that amount of time you've been focusing on basically planning for Black Friday, planning for the holiday season. Get that on the roadmap because those are things that can help you down the road. I can't tell you enough how some of the advancements in Mongo alone, my I guess my favorite technology to play with these days. Just the newer versions have done some really interesting things that help you from a business perspective as well as from an ops perspective. And that's the thing we kind of hide. We want customers to focus on their data. I'll handle the operations stuff. But it can make my life easier, which then gives me more time to make your life easier because we can dedicate more time helping you and doing stuff like that. But down the road, these advancements are just going to add to that bottom line. There are things that are newer and better ways of doing things. People every day find something cool and like, hey, we can do this better. So definitely keep that on the roadmap. That's a big thing to do.
Very good. I had a little slow mute button there. Question that I have that I try to ask whenever we have people who can speak to both the as a service and grow your own solution. Can you talk us through how you look at that decision-making process? Do I want to go with someone who has a purpose-built tool, or do I want to build my own with expertise to come alongside me and help me tune and optimize that thing myself? Can you talk us through maybe that decision-making process and how you would fall on that, whether it makes more sense to go with that as a service, or whether it might make more sense to build your own?
I like to go back to that kind of 5 things that you do now and 5 things you want to do. And like I said, throwing it out on the table and kind of figuring out what technologies play with where. Not just technologies, though, but I also like to include in that like people who do that as a service, like our Mongo service, or our cloud service, different things like that. Like another question I remember from Managed Cloud versus dedicated, which one do you go with, right? There's some scaling issues on both sides. There's some performance issues on both sides. These are all things that have to be accounted for when you're bringing these technologies to the table. When it comes to the kind of bottom line, cost is definitely a factor there. Building something yourself, you're going to need people who can solve that problem. And it might not be a trivial technological problem. It might turn out to be non-trivial. A week in, you realize you're reinventing the wheel, and you realize maybe for a week I should have been playing with the different providers that are out there that have played with different things. One of the things that we do when we're looking at new features and new technologies that we're rolling out is we actually go out to the marketplace and we find out, hey, what are other people doing? Because maybe it's better for us to also look at partnering with someone or working with somebody who does something, who is an expert in something. But if it has things that we feel we could add to that, we will add to that. We'll kind of layer it, wrap it, if you will, right? Abstract away some of the complexities and solve some of those simple things. That's certainly something that should be on the table when thinking about this particular problem, is that going with something that you built yourself is going to solve that particular need. But what happens when your need changes? That one extra idea that you had in the middle of the night while reading some magazine, and you're like, man, I want to go in and do that tomorrow. And when you look at solving that problem, you realize the way you designed it before isn't going to jive with that new thing, right? So do you bust that off into its own, like say, microservice, its own little thing that doesn't have to affect the larger problem that you've already solved? Or do you say, oh, I've got this provider out there that can do something just to solve that one problem? Then you start kind of playing with this idea of this polyglot scenario, right? Some of your things are going to be custom. Some of your things are going to be something you should do with a as-a-service offering. So I think it really comes down to that pro-con trade-off, and also talking to people. I get tickets all the time. Hey, I'm looking at these other providers. I'm looking at yours. Let's lay it all out there. Sometimes other providers have certain features that meet a need, and it's just the better idea to go with. I think a great example of that is when you look at the difference between the hybrid cloud, the private cloud, the dedicated, the cloud that we have. Different things, different parts of your components should be put on those different infrastructures for the different levels of service that you can get in them. So even within the same provider, that's something I just thought about, I guess. Even within the same provider, they might offer different services, and you should choose the best one to go with there.
Yeah, I think the cleanest example of that is you can go with the managed operation service level for an entire account. But your test and dev environment may not need to have that level of attention and access and support on top of it. So even within one product, a public cloud, it may be really, really valuable to have two accounts, one in which you have the top tier of service, and that's your production, most important financially to your business environment, and then all the other components can potentially just go happily in a non-managed piece of the cloud. And so there's a lot of conversations to have there, and I think prioritization still is going to be the most important piece of this conversation, and the cleaner and clearer you have your priorities, what problem needs to be solved, what thing that we're doing well do we need to protect, what new direction is the most important to our future success. Once you have those answers to those questions, and that stack ranking of the absolute paramount thing is this, and right after we solve that, we need to be sure we get this thing done, and way down at the bottom is this other thing that'd be just nice to have. Let's not spend any time at it until we've already knocked out the have-to-have components of that prioritization. I think that conversation really drives the rest of these conversations we've had today, and there are many, many more. So I can't reiterate enough. If it's your department or your business or your entire organization of whatever that might be, having that conversation and getting a clear picture of the direction and the requirements, priorities, it's going to pay dividends in all sectors, but it's specifically useful here.
And don't be afraid to reach out, like customers, like send us a ticket, give us a call, let us know what your goals are. Our account managers do a great job of getting on the phone call and saying, hey, we just solved this problem. What's the next two you got down the pipeline? Because then we'll start an internal discussion. We'll start going around and seeing what ideas we have to bring to the table, and bring us in. Treat us like a partner, not like a vendor.
We can only be as helpful as you let us be.
Exactly. That's a great place to wrap up our conversation. We definitely want to be your partner. And John, you've shown us a lot of great solutions and great questions, frankly, that we need to be looking at as well as we wrap up the year and start off the next year. So thank you, John, for taking an hour out of your day to chat with us. It's been very informative. Really appreciate it. Thanks to everybody back at the Object Rocket office for letting John have the hour off to chat with us. Great guest on our show. Yeah, this has been a great way to wrap up our year. This is going to be the last show we do for the year. We're going to come back next year, though, and I mentioned earlier we have several different shows that are focused around data, around big data, around NoSQL options. So check that out starting off next year. We've also got we're bringing back our frequent guest on the show. We're bringing back John Ingates, our CTO, with his annual predictions for the cloud. So we're going to be talking with him next year. We're going to be talking with several of our partners and vendors. And Drew, what else do we have coming up next year? I think we got 3 months worth of shows scheduled, so quite a bit. What am I missing?
Yeah, I'm sure you're missing all kinds of exciting things. There is plenty to talk about.
Yeah,
keep posted. Watch the Google Plus page, our Twitter handles, and keep an eye out at ohpodcast.com.
Yeah.
And we'll be keeping things updated there. We're really excited to talk to some of our vendors. We've had meetings with them here over the last couple of weeks that seem to be very moving towards very fruitful and informative shows. So if we were the experts, if we only could talk about what we're experts on, we have many shows, but we have a lot of bright people we have access to. So you're in luck to be able to bring those to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned ohpodcast.com. That's where you can actually go and check out a lot of our recent episodes. And you can also sign up for a podcast RSS feed. So if you want to listen to these episodes, just us talking and not see our pretty faces, that's a great way to do it while you're driving, while you're washing the dishes around the house, however you like to listen to podcasts that are out there for you. So I think that's it. We'll just go ahead and wrap it up for the year. I can't believe it's already just a couple of weeks away from the year being over. But it's been a great year, and this is a great way to wrap it up. So thanks again, John. Thanks, Drew, for everything. And I guess we'll see everybody next year. Take it easy.
Thanks, guys.